So we're on 2 Samuel chapter 3, and it's got one of my favorite lines in it, and I'll let you know what that is when we read it. It is a line that I learned from the King James Version, so I'll tell you what it is in the NET and the NIV, and also the King James Version, the line itself, and you can tell me what you like most afterwards. But in this, if I were to give this a title, it's Now Then Do It. That's the title, Now Then Do It. And that's the line that I really like, actually. So I already told you, so spoiler alert. But you haven't heard it in context yet. But I'm going to go ahead and read 2 Samuel chapter 3. All right, if I can find it. All right. Okay. However, the war was prolonged between the house of Saul and the house of David was becoming steadily stronger, while the house of Saul was becoming increasingly weaker. So, of course, this was Abner, who was a strong and empowered general of Israel. He put Ishbosheth in charge, so he really had all the power, but was getting weaker as David was growing stronger. Now sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon. I want you to remember that name, Amnon. Not a good guy, but it was his firstborn. I shouldn't do that because then I lose my place. All right, now sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon, born to Ahinoam, the Jezreelite. His second son was Chileab, born to Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. His third son was Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. His fourth son was Adonijah, the son of Haggith. His fifth son was Shephatiah, the son of Abital. His sixth son was Ithream, born to David's wife Eglah. Beautiful name. These sons were all born to David in Hebron. If you're reading that, you're like, wow, a lot of sons, and what you'll hopefully notice is that not one of them have the same mother. And so here David has multiplied his wives and therefore increased how many sons he had, which was super common at that time for kings and people of wealth and status to accumulate wives so that they could accumulate offspring at a faster pace. And so he was just doing what was common. And yesterday, I was recording a podcast with some of the guys, and we were talking about Solomon, right? And what? Yeah, we're talking about Solomon. And I don't know if you know this, but Solomon had a few wives. He had about 700 wives and 300 concubines, which are wife-like without property rights. And so he had 1,000 women, which to me is absolutely wild. And yet he's very wise. And you have to think to yourself, that's a really dumb thing to do for all the wisdom you have. And David is accumulating wives here, not to that extent, but he's got a lot of wives. Well, so is that okay? Is that fine to do that? And I remembered, and to my credit, and they know this, I remembered this, Deuteronomy 17:17. I'm just as impressed I remembered the reference. But we already knew in the law that kings were given specific instructions. Do not multiply the number of wives you have, right? This is bad. It's not a good idea. So what David is doing by taking on numerous wives, same with Solomon, was wrong. It's not something that you should have done for a king to do. And it even warns. I want to read it to you. It says this. Furthermore, this is Deuteronomy 17:17. He must not marry many wives, lest his affections turn aside, and he must not accumulate much silver and gold. So, in other words, don't get too many wives and so much wealth that it's gonna turn you away from the truth. This is not a good idea. And the Bible sometimes will go ahead and tell you what happened, and it's not going to explicitly say in that moment, and by the way, this was wrong. You know what it's going to do? It's going to show you. It's going to describe to you what happened, and you're going to realize how unwise that was. So I told you to kind of think about that Amnon name. We'll get to it later. But just so you know, Amnon was a really weird guy, and he fell in love with his half-sister. And then he violates his half-sister. And then his brother Absalom gets so mad at him that he kills him. And then he's mad at his dad because his dad was David, didn't do anything. So then he causes a civil war. The other two sons, they're ungodly. Basically, all of these sons here died young, were ungodly, caused a civil war, or was a rapist. Like all of these sons, in fact, what you didn't see here was the one son that will inherit the kingdom because he hasn't been born yet. He's the least born of these sons, and his name is Solomon. He's not born yet because that is going to come out of a fault of David with Bathsheba. And so all of these sons to all of these different women, it all ends very poorly for him. And I've said this before, but even when you look back, God's ideal is in Genesis chapter 3. God's ideal is, for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and will be united with his wife, and the two will become one. That's God's ideal. And when you look at, for instance, Abraham, who is the father of the promise to the Israelites, from whom many nations will be blessed, you're like, okay, he received this promise. He's like, I am going to multiply for you generations. It's more than the stars in the sky, can't be counted, more than the sand. And Abraham says, that's great. My wife, though, is old. I'm talking like well beyond the age to have kids. But God had promised this. And so Abraham had an opportunity to believe that God's promises, that his commandments are his enablements, that God will make it happen. He had an opportunity to really believe in the miraculous power of God. And yet, after receiving that promise, his wife came to him and said, you know, I am old, so maybe take my maidservant as a wife, Hagar. And so he did. And there's a certain irony here. Because if you're looking even at like the conflict with Israel and Palestine and the rest of Israel surrounded by all these Muslim nations. And there's this tremendous conflict to where you have a group that wants the total eradication of the Jews. And why is it? It's sort of inherent in this Islamic mentality that a Jewish state is bad and wrong, and these people need to be, frankly, exterminated. That's really a part of the process. How did this all start? Well, easy. You trace it all the way back to Sarah and Hagar. It all started because Abraham married that maidservant Hagar. And when he married that maidservant Hagar, she bore a son, Ishmael, from whom all of Muslims will trace themselves back to Ishmael. And where do all of Jews trace themselves back? To Isaac, the son born to Sarah. After, right? So God said, I will prosper you. I will make you a father of nations. He's married to Sarah, but But how could this be? She's too old. I guess I got to marry this person. And so Hagar has a son, Ishmael. But when Sarah gets pregnant, she says, uh-oh, now I'm kind of jealous of this and I don't like this. And they kick him out. And that Hagar, that Ishmael, that nation, that becomes where Islam will draw themselves back. And that conflict exists today. That failure to believe in the promise of God, that he will make it done. But Abraham looked at it and saw it as insurmountable. It's, well, no, I mean, nobody who's that old can have children. So it must be another way. I'll take it into my own hands. You know, when we get farther away from God's ideal, I think that's when we experience a lot of hardship in our lives. And I've told you before, what I think one of the problems that can happen is that as Christians or as people of faith, sometimes we ask, where's the line? What shouldn't I do? I told you before that when I was at George Fox University as a young student, I paid the price for this because I saw the pathways around this clock tower had all of these signs that said, don't step on the grass. And I was so hyper-focused on what not to do that it actually bothered me. I said, why not? I mean, if I just cut across here, it will save me 5 minutes to get to my class, and yet I got to go through this exaggerated concrete path around things just to get to my class? It's like, why can't I step on the grass? I was so hyper-focused on what not to do that eventually I just said, I'm a little bit of a rebel. What's one step? And so I stepped out, I looked around, like, I'm probably going to start a movement. I think I'm going to get these signs removed because people are going to see me and they're going to be like, yeah, let's bring back walking on the grass. Anyways, I about lost my shoe because I went so deep into the grass, I understood the sign. But it was not until I had to go into my class with one shoe absolutely caked in mud, right? And people were like, ooh, what happened? Yeah, I stepped on the grass. But I was so focused on what not to do that eventually I was like, man, this boundary, this line, it's like, why can't we cross it? I wasn't focused on the ideal. I was focused on the what not to do. When we are not saying, God, I don't just want the bare minimum. I don't want, hey, what shouldn't I do? What are the exact commands so I can avoid those things and be okay? I want your best in my life. I want your ideal, what you want for me. I want to live into your gracious and wonderful and awesome plan for my life. I don't want to just avoid the worst. I want to embrace the best. And yet we can be these line riders of saying, where is the line so I can stay close to it without crossing it? What movies and music and places, where can I go? What can I listen to? What can I watch? Sometimes we're just looking for the rules, the boundaries so we can stay within it. I promise you, if you are leaning into God's ideal, you never have to worry about the boundary. He will always lead you in the way that he wants you to go. It's always wonderful, and it always has your best interest in mind. That sign actually did have my best interest in mind. But because I wasn't thinking about the best interest, I was just thinking about the sign and the don't do, that eventually I was like, but why? Why? Why not? I'd rather just be a person who lives into God's ideal. Well, David is not. He's not living into God's ideal, and each of these sons is going to be rough and difficult, and it's not going to go the way that he wants it to go. And so I just want you to see that. Yeah, you can see the multiple wives here, and you can ask why. You can also look at the consequences of him having the multiple wives and the multiple sons, and you can see it didn't go well for him. He's not living into God's ideal as God has designed marriage. And as I told you, this was really common. And I think that can also happen. We can look at what's common and just kind of fall into play. Well, everyone else is sort of doing this. This is just normal. This is just how people, I don't know. I think for young people, sometimes it's like how to dress. Well, everyone dresses like this. This is normal. This is what it looks like. Or everybody's watching these things. Everyone's reading these things. I had so many Christians who I actually saw reading the book when it came out, 50 Shades of Grey. I didn't know anything about it. I said, oh, what's that book about? I see a lot of people reading it. And then they're kind of like, oh, well, it's, I was like, no, I have no clue. What is it about? And as I understand, it's a really super sexualized book. I would call it pornographic book in its reading. And yet it's common. Everyone's reading it. Everyone's doing it. Just because it is common does not mean that it is good for you. Certainly not God's ideal for you. I was recently, like I said, I was in Hawaii, and I made a categorical mistake. So my wife, like I said, she's kind of a crunchy mama. She likes all things natural. She's like, hey, we got to protect the coral. So here's a mineral-based sunscreen. Doesn't hurt the coral. It's only 30 SPF. I'm Irish. I need like 150 SPF. But this was 30. And I put it on, and then I walked out to the water. Now, I had a rash guard in my bag. I thought, after a little bit, I'll put it on to protect, the more unseen parts of myself, that fight with the sun. But I went out there, I went into the ocean. I love the ocean. In Hawaii, it was so beautiful and awesome and nice. And I get into the water, and like I'm in the water, so it should be fine. And after about an hour or so, I saw clouds kind of come and block the sun a little bit. I was like, oh, now I'm extra fine. I don't need to go and reapply or anything. I'm good. And so I'm just in the water. And I'm going deep, and I'm feeling protected, and I can't feel anything. And then that night, I knew I was burned. And it wasn't like, it kind of got me. I'm talking sun blister burn. The next morning, it was bubbling on my shoulders. It got really bad. And I was at a farmer's market there, and I saw a lady, and she's like, yeah, she didn't realize I was so burned because I had a shirt on, obviously. And she's like, some tourists, they don't realize that when it's overcast, that's when it gets you. Because those UVs are still going through, But people are dumb. I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I know better anyway, but I was burned. And I really do feel like that some people, though, in life, the way that they're living, they just don't realize they're being burned. They're doing things that are fun, and I was having fun. I was comfortable. It was good. The water was warm, but not too hot. It was cool. Everything was great. Everything is how I was wanting it, And I didn't realize the water is amplifying everything, and I'm being burned. I'm being hurt. I'm actually my cells are breaking down, and they're fighting, and it's not good for me. But I don't know I'm being burned. Feels good. Like that can be the experience in this way. It feels good. It's awesome. It's great, but you're being burned. It's not good for you. You're filling your heart and your mind with things that aren't good for you. And the things that you put inside of you come back out of you. There was a young mom who brought her kids to a family event, and their uncle was drinking a lot, and the kids wandered down to the basement where uncle was down there and was drinking. And when she came down there, she saw that he was saying that all of these terrible things. And she took her kids and brought them up, and she said, that wasn't good for you to hear, but I want you to know that nothing that he said was because of the alcohol. All of that was there already. The thing is, maybe the alcohol just showed it. But nothing comes out of you that wasn't there already. And so you have to recognize that when you are living your life, it's easy just to do what is common and what everyone else is doing. It's easy to watch the same things, listen to the same music, and to embrace the same lifestyles. But you're being burned. And you're putting things in your heart and your mind that will come out of you. Maybe it will be in how you talk to your family or the people around you. Sometimes it'll just come out in sort of an explosion. My son, when we were in Hawaii, we got him this glass turtle, and he loved it. He liked it. When we went to that beach where I got burned, he lost it. And he came in, he's like, Mom, where'd you put my necklace? And she's like, what do you mean? Where'd you put it? He's like, I put it down by my shoes. And she's like, oh, you can't do that. You lost it. And my son really did like it. And he was devastated. See, but my first reaction is, we paid, we just bought that. We just paid, not a small amount for that. Like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And I'm starting to get angry at him, and I want to yell. He's already hurt, and he's already devastated because he did love it. And my wife, who's so much better than I am in those situations, she kind of gets down with him and says, I'm sorry, buddy, but that's what happens. Right? It is. It's an instructive time to say, you know what? I know you love that, but that's why you got to be more careful. That's why you got to be more intentional. And I felt very convicted after that because I was there just sort of wanting to yell at him and get angry at him because how careless. Because I've never done anything like that. Right? I've never, just lost something. By the way, my wallet is still with a guy who reached out to me on Facebook. I lost it over a year ago. And he reached out to me. I'm never on Facebook. So I got on there one day, and he's like, hey, is this yours? I found your wallet at this place. And I was like, oh, yeah, hey, I'll come and get it. That was like 6 months ago that I said that. And so I lose things. I'm careless. I do dumb things. And yet, like, I was so angry over something that my son was devastated about. And I don't like that. That's in me. And so when I see things in me come out of me that I don't like, that's when I need to be really intentional with how'd that get there, and God, what can I do to have you reshape me and change me? I want God to be present in the change that I need. I want God to put new things in me, better things in me. I want whatever those things that come out of me that aren't good, that aren't healthy, that aren't God's best for me, I want God's ideal, because I don't like those things. Give me more patience. Give me more love. Give me greater wisdom to see the times where that's not righteous anger. That's just mean. I want to see those things. But that's common. That's common. But God does not call us to be common. He calls us to be set apart, to be different, to make a difference. God calls us to be Christian, which by definition cannot look the same as the world because it is not of the world. And yet we have in the United States carried a reputation where many people are what we call Christian by name only. In other words, Christians who aren't different in any meaningful or substantial way. They just look the same. It cannot be that way. I want to continue. So we should not move away from God's ideal, as David did here. And it will cause lots of trouble with him. So I want you to see that. Even though I read it here and you don't see it immediately, that all of his multiplying of his wives does not end well. He's being what I call in the classroom a dum-dum. Okay. 9, I think, is where I left off. Nope, I didn't. 6, thank you. All right. As the war continued between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner was becoming more influential in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine named Ritzpah, daughter of Aiah. Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" These words of Ishbosheth really angered Abner, and he said, "Am I the head of a dog that belongs to Judah? This very day I am demonstrating loyalty to the house of Saul your father and to his relatives and his friends. I have not betrayed you into the hand of David, yet you have accused me of sinning with this woman today. God will severely judge Abner if I do not do for David exactly what the Lord has promised him, namely, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, all the way from Dan to Beersheba." Ishbosheth was unable to answer Abner with even a single word because he was afraid of him. Abner had the power, obviously, and his influence was growing, and maybe this was Ishbosheth trying to regain power, so he manufactured an accusation. "Hey, why did you take my father's property?" That was this concubine, right? This idea of a woman who was designed in those times to bear offspring, to accumulate more offspring for the king, but didn't have the property rights of a wife. That's what so they were married to in a sense, but it was not something that you should do, not something that should happen. Abner being with the concubine, and based on Abner's anger, it does really seem like this is probably a false accusation. But I want you to hear what Abner says. It's really interesting. He recognizes the promise of the Lord to David. Why in the world was Abner not already pursuing the transfer of power if he knew the Lord had promised it to David? It says this, "Then Abner sent messengers to David saying, 'To whom does the land belong? Make an agreement with me, and I will do whatever I can to cause all Israel to turn to you.' So David said, 'Good, I will make an agreement with you. I ask only one thing from you. You will not see my face unless you bring Saul's daughter Michal when you come to visit me.' David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, with this demand: 'Give me my wife Michal, whom I acquired for 100 Philistine foreskins.'" Now, he could have said 200 because that's really what he brought, which is a weird thing to do, but that was what Saul wanted. He wanted 100 foreskins of the Philistine. We don't know exactly the process of how he acquired them. I'll leave that to your imagination. So Ishbosheth took her from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband went along behind her, weeping all the way to Bahurim. Finally, Abner said to him, "Go back." So he returned home. This is kind of a sad scene. So Michal was taken from David when Saul accused David of treason. Michal and David were married, but now Michal was given to another guy. And he's like, "Wait, that's my wife. Quit it, give her back." And Abner says, "Go home." He's like, "All right, fine." But it's a really strange scene. Did David need this to happen? No, but he was multiplying his wives. He was still taking to, and you're going to see that the heart of a man willing to take a woman from another man is still in David. And it will come out of David later. You all know the story, or you might know the story of Bathsheba, but we'll get to it. But I want you to see the elements. This is sort of foreshadowing a heart that is willing to take at the expense of other people because he wants and desires it for himself. And it can start somewhere. You know, when you look at the grave sins of people in the world, it usually doesn't just start right there. Like, how did Mao, during the Great Leap Forward in China, let millions, we're talking 50 to 60 million people, starve to death in order for him to try to accomplish this new way forward in China? How did Pol Pot? How did Stalin? How did Hitler? How did all of these people willingly let so many people die? In fact, in the 20th century, when you put all of the people during the red-handed communism, when you calculate the number of people who died during peacetime, it far exceeds the number of people who died during all of the wars combined. In the Encyclopedia of War, there's well over 1,000 wars, and you combine all of the death tolls. The red hand of communism during peacetime killed even more than that. That's wild. How do you get to that point? How does a person do that? It's not like just one day somebody wakes up and says, genocide. It's building in yourself a heart that no longer sees people as people. David is building in his heart a willingness to take from others, to not see the hurt in other people, to not see the face of another person, and it's going to manifest in ways that will hurt his future and the future of his people. I want you to see that because the seed's planted here, where he's totally willing to take McCall back at the expense of another person, and despite the fact that he already has several wives. All right. Abner advised the elders of Israel, previously you were wanting David to be your king. Act now. That's the NET, or now then do it, which is the KJV, or the NIV is just now do it. You wanted this. This is what you want, so then just do it. Act now. For the Lord said to David, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the Philistines and from all their enemies. So there is a difference to know what is true and to live out what is true. So we saw Abner. He knew what was true. He knew the promise. Why was he not doing it already? Because he was acquiring for himself power in Israel. He had a puppet king in Ishbosheth. He was the guy really in charge, you could tell, because when Ishbosheth manufactured an accusation, he said, "Excuse me? Do you know who you're talking to? Am I a dog? Have I not been faithful?" And Ishbosheth was like, "I don't want to say anything else because I'm afraid." Abner had the power to control the armies, the power to turn the tide, the power to dethrone Ishbosheth. And he said, "You know what? I should do what the Lord has already promised and transfer power." So you know, but you do not do. Abner made the correct decision, but he didn't do it for the right motivations. He did it because he was mad. He did it because Ishbosheth accused him of something that presumably he didn't do. So I said this here. Abner is a good example of those of us who know things to be true, but we do not live as if they are true. We may know what the truth is, but we do not live as if it is true. We might say with our mouths that, Jesus is Lord. But is he Lord of your life? It says this in James 4:17. So whoever knows what is good to do and does not do it is guilty of sin. So here Abner knew what was right, but he didn't do it till now. 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. Why is he doing the right thing here? Well, he's doing it for the wrong motivations. He's just doing it because he now sees the power dynamic is being threatened. James 4:3. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly so you can spend it on your passions. Colossians 3:17, and whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Why are you living the way that you're living is a really important question to ask yourself. Doing things for the glory of God is important, really important. And knowing the truth of God's word, but not doing it, now that's sin, as James tells us. And I know that we live in a culture. We just live in a culture where there are many people who know what is right but don't live it. There are many people who believe in the power of Jesus, but don't actually live as if he has power in their lives. Since I was in Hawaii, I was reading some signs, and it's a nation that had a really interesting system called the kapu system, which just means like forbidden. So whenever Ashley and I were walking around in places, sometimes you'd see these signs that would say kapu, which means forbidden, don't go there, don't touch, don't walk on these things. This is sort of a sacred area. And their system was very strict. It required that, for instance, men and women don't eat with each other, that your shadow even can't fall on certain holy things, or you could be killed. It required human sacrifice. So this is in order to appease their gods. Your shadow couldn't even fall on things. Men and women couldn't eat with each other, and their strictness required that sometimes the god just wanted you to sacrifice another human. This is kind of a crazy system. And then missionaries came. Hiram Bingham was actually one of the first missionaries to go, and this was in 1840, I believe, is when the missionaries started to go to Hawaii. And I found it really interesting because they did let them come and teach because they were bringing some education and teach. And they had a queen regent. So there was a guy who united the entire island, and his name is Kamehameha, King Kamehameha. And he died and left his wife as queen regent. And her name, I wrote it down because it's hard, it's Hawaiian, is Ka'amuanu. Might have gotten that right. But Ka'amuanu was the queen, and she was actually left with some power. And his son, which was Kamehameha II, took power, and they were sort of ruling together. And when these missionaries were present and teaching, I mean, they were kind of reluctant. But I want you to see the door that opened for them to change the entire kapu system. It started when she went there and she delivered supplies and gave them to the missionaries, and she just was sort of testing the waters. And she said, okay, well, I don't really want to know about this or that. I want you to pray for me. I want you to pray for me. And Ashley and I have experienced in our lives, and I think many of other people may have experienced in their lives, that even people who are not Christian are sometimes at least willing to accept your prayer for them. And you can sometimes get an into a person's life, not through your willingness. Hey, I want to tell you this, that, this. Sometimes people are reluctant and they close off, but you know what it can start with? I just want to pray for you. I want you to experience a God who answers. I want you to at least hear what it sounds like for me to bring you in prayer to a Father that loves you. And ultimately, it was her experience of prayer that led her to come more often and say, okay, this God that I saw you bring to me in prayer, I'd like to know, a little bit more. And eventually, this woman became baptized, and took communion, and it was her eating with Kamehameha II that brought the whole infrastructure of the Kapu system down. Men and women don't eat with each other. You know why? It brings a curse of the gods. And so before everybody believing in that system, they said, watch. Whatever gods you think are out there, we will spite them in the name of Jesus. You will see us eat together, and nothing will happen because our God is greater. And the system just crumbled. The Kapu system is dead. It is dead. Why? Because Jesus came to the island. And just reading about the missionary work and the way of they took these the people who everyone was looking to on this pedestal, eating together, and the system fell because the Kapu gods had no power over the island anymore. And so I look at this willingness of, it started with prayer. I think it's so cool. It started with prayer that opened the door, and then a willingness to live out the ideals in a system where it's like, it could be scary. Everyone believes that you're going to bring a big curse down in this Kapu system of sacrifice where not even shadow can fall in the wrong place. We will show you by us eating together that this system is broken and dead. We have an opportunity to demonstrate the power of Christ in the way we live it out to a world that needs to see it. If we are just doing what is common and what is easy, then they're not seeing the bounty that comes from sacrifice to Jesus in our lives. I want to live like that. Well, when? That's that Abner 9 that I really like. Act now. Act now, now then do it, as it says. 2 Corinthians 6:2, where Paul is quoting from Isaiah chapter 49, verse 8. He says, I heard you at the acceptable time, and in the day of salvation I helped you. That's Isaiah. And so Paul says, look, now is the acceptable time. Look, now is the day of salvation. What are you waiting for? Act now. James 1:22, but be sure you live out the message and do not merely listen to it and so deceive yourselves. Matthew 4:19 through 20, he said to them, follow me and I will turn you into fishers of people. What was the response? They left their nets immediately and followed him. I used to, one of the words I came to like saying was immediately. So sometimes I would say to my wife, like, hey, can you come here immediately? It just all of a sudden there's this weird urgency to it, right? I needed to do that immediately. Even that, it's like, whoa, okay, wait, wow. So it's not like, hey, can you do that? It's, hey, can you do that immediately? And doesn't it just bring on a new meaning? Well, there was one time when, because that word was so in my vocabulary, my wife and I were on like a juicing binge, and we had a juicer and we would juice, and I set up the juice and I did it, and then I kind of set it aside and forgot to clean it. And one day my wife was like, why are there so many fruit flies everywhere? It was disgusting. And then she found that the juicer had been sitting there for a little bit, not clean, with all of the leftovers of veggies and things that I had juiced. And she's like, I'm not cleaning this. You're cleaning it. So I have a really sensitive gag reflex, and there were fruit flies everywhere. And it smelled really bad, so I put on a hood, and I cinched it, and I put things in my nose, and I put on safety goggles, and I went at it. I'm going to clean this thing. And it was so bad that at one point I said to my wife, I'm going to throw up immediately. And I did. I ran to the I've since learned methods not to do that. But I remember it was so in my vocabulary, I just said, I'm going to throw up immediately. And I did. Right then, I did it. Because I had to. See, but Jesus asks us to act immediately in our lives. The trick is, you don't have to. But you should. You should do it. You should act immediately. Don't we see David should live into God's ideal? And when he doesn't, it doesn't end well for him. Some of the trouble, some of the hardships, some of the things in our lives that may be difficult can be our unwillingness to act in the way that we ought to. Maybe you're looking and you're saying, there are things that I should do differently. There are ways in which, I should read my Bible. I should pray. I should do these things. I should have better habits. Maybe you just need to hear what Abner said, which is, act now. Now then do it. Don't be a person who just says, I should. Be a person who says, I will and I am. It's why one of the habits I have now, and you'll see this, maybe you text me and say, hey, can you pray for me? If I can, and usually I can, right in that moment, then I will. So then I can say, I'm praying for you right now. Probably in our Christian jargon, one of the most common things is like, hey, I'll pray for you. But life happens. And you don't. And you forget. And you don't do it. Now then, do it now. Now. Like if you're there, just act. Maybe you need to hear that. Maybe you need to hear that there is a sense at which you need to have immediacy in your life. Urgency. I'm an introvert. You might not know that. I can be very extroverted, but when I get home, I just need to, my wife knows that. I need to recoup. But also it means that when I'm in settings, especially in the university, and I hear someone saying something like, hey, does anyone have any questions? Or does anyone want to comment on that? And I'm in my head and I'm thinking, I got some good ideas. But 9 out of 10 times, I never share those ideas because I get stuck thinking about it and I'm about to, and then people are speaking. I'm like, I'm going to wait for the right time, and then it never happens. I never do. And I never share. I never say anything. Maybe you get in those situations, you're like, oh man, I did have something to say, or I should have said that, or I wanted to. You know what? You do need be a person who acts urgently, who says those things that need to be said, who lets, if God is prompting your heart to say something, it does mean that someone needs to hear it. And if you are not responding to the will and the way of God in your life, then sometimes you're robbing somebody else of the opportunity to hear it then and now. Urgency is important. Just that, dropping their nets immediately. I said this is an illustration of Jesus' lordship in our lives. He is in fact King of kings and Lord of lords, but he chooses, for the most part, to exercise his sovereignty by invitation. Some do not invite Jesus to rule over anything. Some invite Jesus to reign over a small area, like Hebron. So here, David is only in Hebron. Why? Because they didn't yet invite him to rule over in the entire kingdom. Could he have conquered them? Of course, but it's his own people. I want you to want me. I want you to want it for your lives. That's one of the biggest struggles as a chaplain, as a person in young people's lives, is you'll look at them and they're just having fun and they're listening to things, and I can go and I say, this isn't good for you. You shouldn't do this. But at the end of the day, you can't just do it because I'm telling you not to do it. You should do it because you want to. Because you want more of Jesus in your life. Because you want to experience him. Because you want a relationship with him. That's what's sustainable. That's what goes. If you're doing it just for me, that won't last. Do it because you're so in love with Jesus, you want more of him in your life. Do it because you want the power of his change in your heart. Do it because you just want to live for the only God there is, who has your best interests in mind, who will lead you in the best things. God is inviting you. And so it's this invitation. He wants to be Lord of your life, but he won't force it. In the end, there will be a time when that choice is over. Act now. Act now. And honestly, we need to be people who are recognizing the urgency of this word, living it out for the sake of people who aren't receiving it. I want the world to be changed by the message of Jesus. And Jesus is inviting us to act now. So now then, do it. My invitation to you this morning is maybe there's something in your life that needs to stop, needs to change, or you need to do. So then, do it. Do it. Act now. Make those changes now. Jesus is inviting us through the power of His Spirit to make changes in our life in response to the invitation to invite the fullness of His Lordship over us. I'm going to pray that. Lord, thank you that you are Lord. Be Lord of our lives. God, I don't want to invite you into part of me. I want to invite you into all of me. Lord, I want the power of your change in me. I want, like Peter, for you not just to wash my feet, but to wash everything, God. I want to be your disciple. I want to be your ambassador. I want to be someone who experiences your fullness in my life, which sometimes means getting rid of the things that hurt that. God, I don't want what's common. I want what is uncommon to this world, God, which is you and you alone leading my life. I want what lasts. God, I pray that you would bring that to us, God. That we would be people who are not just knowing what is true, but living it out. God, I pray that we would be people who are leaning into your ideal. And if we don't know what that is, God, I pray that we would be people who are in prayer, asking for you to reveal to us the next step in our lives so that we may lean into it. And Lord Jesus, help us to act now, to recognize the immediacy and urgency of this word. Let us not miss an opportunity to be your ambassadors to a world that is so desperate for the change of a Savior. God, we thank you for the freedom we experience now. God, and as the world changes, I pray that we have you as our foundation and that we are unchanged by the ever-changing tides of a world that does not know you. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for worship. Thank you for church. I pray that we would be people who remember our blessings and that you are Lord over all. In your precious name, amen.